Over the centuries, many people have given their different definitions of history. If you ask me, history can be seen in a lot of ways. One is to see it as a TV series. A very long one, with many, many protagonists, villains, and seasons. Just like in TV series, there are crossover episodes. Throughout history, there have been some events that are very similar to what we would call a crossover. Hello damsels and knights, I'm Sam Godwin, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to discover 7 crossover events in history. The facts will be presented in pure chronological order. Strangers in a strange land. The Celts were an interesting civilization that lived in a very large portion of Europe before the Romans and Germanic tribes conquered their lands. Most of them lived in these territories for their entire lives, but some of them traveled far from their homes, to lands that most of them couldn't imagine. Thanks to war, Celtic warriors were used as mercenaries by many ancient kingdoms. One of them was the land of the Nile, the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. From the 3rd century BC until the times of Cleopatra, the Egyptian army often used Celtic mercenaries from the other side of the Mediterranean in various battles. Some of them found a new home in Egypt, marrying local women and remaining in the land of the pharaohs for the rest of their lives. I find quite strange to imagine a relationship between an Egyptian woman and a Celtic warrior. I mean, think about a first date between these distant cultures.
So, this is the temple where I go every day to make an offer to the gods. What do you think about it?
It's big and there are a lot of statues and images. We don't have those things at home. This statue in front of us is that Adam-Re, a dude that created the universe.
Amon-Ra, technically.
What's the difference?
I don't know. Our religion is a little complicated.
Babe, can I ask you a question?
Sure, go on.
What the fuck is a hippo?
But Celts reached even further than Egypt. In the early months of 323, Alexander the Great was in the legendary city of Babylon, where he received embassies from all over the world, all to seek friendship and acknowledge his power. Among the various embassies that met the invincible Macedonian general were in fact Celtic ambassadors. The details are scarce, but we can only imagine what this men must have thought when they visited Mesopotamia and the ancient city of Babylon. Vikings on crusade. Having the Vikings and the Crusaders associated together is quite strange, but these two worlds merged together in the 12th century. It's the year 1107 and the King of Norway, Sigurd Magnusson I, decided to go on a pilgrimage to the newly formed Kingdom of Jerusalem, with an army of 5,000 warriors loaded on 60 warships. Because why going on pilgrimage alone when you can bring an army with you and have some fun together while plundering some villages along the way? So this group of warrior pilgrims departed from Bergen on what was an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They first stopped in England to recharge their resources, and the next stop were the beaches of Spain and Portugal. Here the Norsemen won a naval battle against the Muslim pirates, plundered some villages and castles in Portugal, and even besieged and conquered Lisbon, bringing chaos, panic, and blood to those who opposed them. Once in the Mediterranean, they were again attacked by Muslim pirates and also plundered the islands of Ibiza and Minorca. After a short stop in Norman Sicily, they finally arrived in the Holy Land, where they met the King of Jerusalem, Baudouin of Bouillon. Once there, the Norse visited the holy sites, but their journey was not over. Because, a crusade is not complete if we don't fight some Muslims and Fetels. So an army composed of soldiers from the Kingdom of Jerusalem led by Baudouin, the Norsemen, led by King Sigurd, and the Venetians led by their ruler Ordolafo Falier besieged and captured the important city of Sidon, thus expanding the Kingdom of Jerusalem. After another victorious battle, our Norse heroes left the Holy Land in 1110 and headed north to reach Miklagard. This is how the Norse called the city of Constantinopolis. Here the king met the Emperor Alexios Komnenos, and the two made a deal. Sigurd will leave a part of his troops to Alexios, so they can join the powerful and feared special military unit of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Varangian Guard, in exchange for money and resources for the trip back. King Sigurd continued his journey by land, through Hungary, Holy Roman Empire, and returned home in 1111, celebrated as a hero, and the poets will eventually write sagas telling the story of this incredible expedition. Also, a little side note. Sigurd was the first official European king to visit the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The voyages of a desperate emperor. Imagine, you are the English king during the 100 Years' War, and your main problem is to decide how to beat those French and take their land. One day you woke up and you receive a letter where the Eastern Roman Emperor asks permission to a meeting at your court. This is the story of that time when Henry IV spent Christmas with a Roman emperor. The situation in Constantinople was bad. Very bad. It's the end of the 14th century and the Eastern Roman Empire was reduced to Thessaloniki, the Peloponnese, and Constantinopolis. Their defense was weak and the Ottomans blockaded Byzantium. So, the Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos decided to take a big decision. Ask for help in the West in person. His journey began in 1399 and lasted 3 years. His first stop was Venice and then Padua, Pavia, and finally the rich city of Milan, where he was received by the powerful Duke John Galeazzo Visconti. His next major stop was Paris, where he was welcomed by the King of France, Charles VI, and later dined with the royal family. From Paris, Manuel sent messages asking for help to Aragon, Castile, and to Navarre. His final stop was England. He was received at Dover by Henry's representative who accompanied him to Canterbury and finally to London, where he, the English king, and the Roman emperor spent the Christmas together. Which is really crazy when you think about it. It was more than 1,000 years from the times of Constantinus since a Roman emperor visited Britain and France. After all those trips, Manuel returned home at Constantinopolis in 1402, full of empty promises. All those meetings were all the same. The emperor was received with great honors and feasts. He made a good impression to all the rulers, but no one really sent real aid to the Romans. Only promises. Without some major help from the West, the empire will lose Thessaloniki in 1423, and then in 1453, Constantinopolis will fall under the cannon fire of the Ottomans. Business first. This story is incredible. Pietro Carini was a Venetian merchant who lived in the first half of the 15th century. In 1431, he was in Crete, where he bought some bottles of wine. To maximize his profits, he decided to sell them in Flanders. So he took his ship, La Quirina, and departed on a voyage from Crete to Flanders. The journey was going quite good, despite a little stop in Portugal to repair the ship. But then off the coast of France, a furious storm hit the ship and drove the crew completely out of any route. The storm lasted for weeks, until the sea calmed down. But fate was not on their side, and the ship was hit again by another storm that completely destroyed the ship. The crew embarked on 2 lifeboats. One will eventually drown in the ocean, but the other, with 47 men on board, continued its journey in the sea until they reached an island. Only 16 men survived. Among them our protagonist, Pietro Carini. They were completely lost somewhere in the far north. After some time, the crew came across some fishermen who took them to a small village. Obviously, the 2 groups did not speak the same language, but fortunately for the Venetians, there was a priest in the village who knew a little bit of Latin, so they were able to communicate in some way. But where was this land? The Venetians planned to sail from Crete to Flanders, but ended up in Rost, in the north of Norway. Here the Venetians lived for 3 months with the locals and observed how these people lived. Pietro himself wrote about the Norwegian way of life in his diary, and this testimony is an important account of how these men and women lived in this remote land at that time. Of all the different things that Pietro saw in the village, one struck him: the stockfish. This seafood, thanks to a certain treatment, could be conserved and be edible for a long time. Now, Pietro Carini just survived a shipwreck. He was at the edge of the known world, living with strange people where he saw the stockfish and its method of conservation. You know what the first thing he thought? I can make money out of it. It's inevitable. You can take away a Venetian from Venice, but you can't take away a Venetian from business. So, after 4 months, the Venetians left Rost with some stockfish in their bags and sailed to London. Once there, the Venetian community of the city helped Pietro and his crew to organize a return trip, this time by land, returning home in 1432. Of the 68 men that departed from Crete, only 11 returned in Venice. Pietro itself presented to the city the report of his journey and, most importantly, the stockfish, which had a big success in the Venetian kitchens for its taste and on Venetian ships for its long conservation. Today, the stockfish is still relevant in Venetian cuisine. The link between Venice and Rost continues till these days, with cultural events dedicated to Carini's voyage. On the island, they even erected a monument in his honor. So, this was the story of a man that shipwrecked at the edges of the known world and made money out of it. The last member of a dying dynasty. Ferdinando Palaiologos, one of the last living members of the Palaiologos dynasty, which ruled the Eastern Roman Empire from 1261 until its fall in 1453. He was born in Plymouth, son of Theodorus Palaiologos, in June 1619. After some time, he transferred in a mansion in Cornwall, and in 1642 supported as a soldier the royalist side at the start of the English Civil War. So, a Palaiologos fought in the English Civil War of the 17th century. How fascinating. But in 1644 he decided to emigrate and join his relatives. You may think that traveled to France, Italy, or maybe Greece. No, his relatives lived in the island of Barbados, in the freaking Caribbean. Here Ferdinand became a landowner, where grew cotton, sugar, and pineapples. He was also a vestryman, and then churchwarden of the local St. John's Parish Church. He built a large mansion called Clifton Hall, named after the house he had lived in with his family in Cornwall. Ferdinand had become known on the island as the Greek Prince of Cornwall. He died in September of 1670, leaving a son, Theodore. He will eventually be a privateer, dying in 1693 at La Coruña, in Spain, where he is still buried today. These two were the last official living members of the Palaiologos family, which died out with them. Just to point out how long the Palaiologos lasted, Ferdinand could have potentially met the famous pirate Henry Morgan, and his son could have met another famous pirate, Henry Avery. So, this was the story of how the last Palaiologos fought in the English Civil War and ended up in the Caribbean. A communist and a capitalist against slavery. Abraham Lincoln was the president of the USA during the Civil War and had an important influence in the political sphere of America. Karl Marx, on the other side, was an important European writer and thinker known, alongside with Engels, for being the ones who introduced communism to the world in their famous book, The Communist Manifesto of 1848. Now, most of us see these two worlds as separate and distant. We don't connect them. But these men actually knew each other. During the Civil War, Lincoln and Marx exchanged some letters between them on topics related to politics. Although they were separated by the Atlantic Ocean, they agreed on the cause of free labor and the need to end slavery. Marx himself wrote several articles on the Civil War in the newspaper The Tribune. The most famous letter was written by Marx in 1864 on behalf of the International Working Men's Association, in which he basically congratulated the president on his re-election and that he supported his war against slavery. Lincoln replied by thanking him for the support and hoping that victory and the end of slavery would be near. Sadly, as we know, Lincoln never saw the end of the Civil War and Marx never saw a nation using his political system in practice, but their ideas and actions continued to live after their death. A Napoleon in the heart of Africa. In 1871, the last emperor of France, Napoleon III, nephew of the famous Napoleon Bonaparte, was deposed after the disastrous Franco-Prussian War of 1870. He went into exile with his family to the last place Napoleon I would have imagined his relatives would go, England, his mortal enemy. With him was his son Louis Napoleon, who, after his father's death in 1873, became Prince Imperial of France and was proclaimed by the Bonaparte supporters Napoleon IV. In England, Louis joined and trained in the British Army. Again, Napoleon would be furious if he knew that one of his relatives would serve in the British Army. But our boy Louis was eager to prove himself and seek real action on the battleground, and the English could give them this opportunity. In 1879, he persuaded the British Army to send him in Africa to fight in the Anglo-Zulu War. In the spring of that year, the relative of Napoleon Bonaparte arrived in Ulundi, the Zulu capital. Louis was eager to see real action, so he was sent with a small force on a scouting mission. Sadly, he was ambushed by a surprise attack by the Zulus and was killed on the 1st of June, 1879 at the age of 23. The news of his premature death shocked everyone back in Europe, as he was the last possible serious dynastic hope for the restoration of the House of Bonaparte to the throne of France. This was the brief story of how the last Bonaparte died fighting the Zulus in Africa. We arrived at the end. Thanks for your time, damsels and knights. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe and see you in the next video.